So there's a new Ghostbusters film called Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and it's a sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife, which itself was a legacy sequel to the original Ghostbusters, and I suppose Ghostbusters 2, but it pretty much ignored that one, and it definitely ignored Ghostbusters 2016, which might have been called Ghostbusters Answer the Call, but I'm not sure. It's worth setting the stage for this review by explaining how I feel about Ghostbusters Afterlife. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I don't really like it. In fact, I think it's a dreadful, embarrassing movie. Almost all of my issues with it boil down to how it treats the source material, because it acts like Ghostbusters is Star Wars, like it's the Bible, worshipping every detail, every moment of that first film, making sure to remind us how magical and epic it all was, when I don't think the first film was like that at all. Maybe it's what 40 years of nostalgia has built up around the film, but the film itself, it's funny, it's grimy, it's cool, don't get me wrong, but it's not epic. I don't think it's interested in being epic. So making a legacy sequel that is so indulgently reverent that it makes me want to praise J.J. Abrams for how much restraint he showed in The Force Awakens is just kind of laughable. The biggest problem with Afterlife is that it's not even all bad. There's a good movie in there somewhere. Maybe just a fine one, but a much less bad one. So when all the potential is sidestepped for the sake of jangling keys for 45-year-old fans in the audience, that's incredibly frustrating. At times it felt like they wanted to move the series into a new genre, a kind of Amblin-esque family adventure, kids in a small town starting up the next generation of Ghostbusters. Very Stranger Things, very Spielberg, and that stuff was at least somewhat compelling to me. None of it was amazing, but a lot of it was pretty charming. But there's such an abysmal dissonance between the tone they're pretending Ghostbusters had, the tone Ghostbusters actually had, and the tone they're trying to aim for in this new reboot. And it's all weighed down by the constant stopping to remind us just how important and amazing that first movie really was. There's no moment from the first movie, no prop that they don't dig up and rinse for all the nostalgia juice they can possibly get from it. Remember spores, molds and funguses? Remember the chocolate that Venkman gave Egon that one time? Remember the Twinkie, the car, the PKE meter, the stack of books, the coin that wasn't even in the movie, the entire villain and third act climax from the first movie? The bit of music that goes doom, 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 doom. You'll hear that in practically every scene. The old Ghostbusters are there, even the dead one. This whole movie, they do this lovely, charming thing with the unseen presence of Egon, He's possessing a lamp and guiding his granddaughter to where she needs to go, and there's a bit of kind of physical comedy with that, and some moments where maybe she plays chess with the ghost of the unseen ghost of her grandfather, and that's all moving, that's all sweet. I like that. And McKenna Grace is great as Phoebe, as this mini Egon, essentially. I think she perfectly understands the vibes of the original and why Egon worked so well as a comedic character. I think that's really, they've hit the nail on the head there on what they needed to do. And then they ruin everything. Because at the end of the film, they just can't help themselves, and they bring in a repulsive CGI, ghoulish Harold Ramis reincarnation, and it's just horrible and sickly and unpleasant, and it just, any goodwill that the film might have built up with the Egon legacy stuff is just kind of, tossed to one side. I made a whole video about CGI faces and CGI people. I don't want to see it, and it was just such a, oh great, we're doing this now as well. I think at every stage the movie does something to ensure that even its best ideas are kind of tainted, and any opportunity it has to not just be a worthless waste of time is just tossed to one side. Having the original Ghostbusters be just absent and characterless until right at the end when they show up in their old clothes and save the day is such an epitome of the, we're giving the fans what they deserve, this is what we want to see mindset. It's funny to me that so many fans lapped it all up, and it's unsurprising to me that, Star Wars fans pointed at it and went, this is what we should have had from the sequel trilogy. A bunch of old fuckers standing in a line. Grow up, they look pathetic, it's sad to see them like this. This is not a good or interesting way to use characters from our past. This is not a good or worthwhile use of any of our time. So that was Ghostbusters Afterlife, and with these feelings in mind, I can't say I was particularly excited for the new one. I wanted to be fair to it and give it a chance. I rewatched all the old ones. I'm glad I did, actually, because the first one is just fantastic. Ghostbusters Afterlife, I think, had had soured me on the concept of ghostbusting. So returning to a film that's funny and slick and inventive and cool, that was really great, and I can't blame it for being misappropriated, you know? It seemed like after Afterlife, the series could go in one of two ways. They could either go, okay, we've got all that nostalgia out of the way, we've done all that now, we can just get on with this new generation and these new stories and committing to that. Or they could have gone, wow, we're back in New York, think of all the new callbacks we can do. And let me just say, the trailer for this movie did not convince me that we'd be getting the former. As much as I told myself I was going into Frozen Empire with an open mind, I will admit that I did have this video on the schedule thinking it would be a kind of negative, impassioned rant against this movie and against the concept of Ghostbusters as a franchise. You know, I wanted to call it Stop Making Ghostbusters Movies. I thought this film would just be like Afterlife, and it would remind me that the people making these movies don't understand the appeal of the original movie and the appeal of the concept, and they just love worshipping the toys from their childhood. So it comes as a tremendous surprise to me, and to those of you who know me and my Ghostbusters Afterlife opinions, it'll be a surprise to you as well. I thought this film was pretty good. I thought it was fun, I had a good time, and I'd like to dive into why. Is that the latest into a video that I've said I'd like to dive into why? It might be, right? So this film, as I've said, is a return to New York, to the fire station. I thought we were going to start out in Oklahoma, in the small town from Afterlife, and we'd see all the convoluted reasons that make all the characters go from there to New York. But the film just skips right past that, and it's already, you know, they've had a bit of time in New York already, and they're established as this ghost-busting team, you know. And I think that's a fantastic decision. That was just what the film needed, I think, to get off to a good start and not burden us with all the ridiculous reasons. We do hear about some of the reasons through exposition, but I think having it be in the past tense makes it feel less contrived, less convoluted, less ridiculous. I think it was one of the decisions early on that made me go, oh, hang on, that's a smart call. And I guess that kind of set me on my path to enjoying myself, because I just started going, hang on, that's not a stupid thing to do. Because the setup of a family of Ghostbusters is a really cute one. You know, they're all in the Ecto-1 together, and it's like a family car journey. You've got Carrie Coon as the mum, Paul Rudd is the teacher of Phoebe and the boyfriend of the mum, and he's kind of stepping into that father figure position. We got Finn Wolfhard wanting to be taken seriously as an adult, and Phoebe, McKenna Grace, remains a standout as the little mini Egon. I will say that other than the fact they can revisit some of the old locations, the fact they're back in New York does feel pretty superfluous to me. The city as a character felt pretty disappointing. It lacked a lot of personality. We don't see enough of the effect of the story on normal people. I think that was part of the reason that the first movie and the second movie worked as well as they did. The city somehow simultaneously feels too clean and artificial and fake, but also too real, and, you know, we get these drone shots of Manhattan, and it's like, yeah, this would look better as a matte painting, really, as a kind of really stylized. That's such a cool part of the first film, is that you've got this kind of grime, but you've also got this, you know, this style, this sauce. That being said, this film is way less lacking in that sort of style than I thought it would be. I understand way less lacking than I thought it would be is not great praise. It speaks to my surprise at this whole thing. I'll rephrase it. Okay. It had way more style than I thought it would. How about that? It starts with a room full of people freezing to death, and we see all their frozen bodies, and one of them was kind of turning the handle on a gramophone, and their frozen hand has snapped off, and it's still going round, attached to the gramophone, and it's like, that's not mind-blowing, but it's cool. It made me go, hang on, that's something. You know, that's a thing that they've done, and it's a bit of imagery that I've remembered. Yeah, good, well done. There's also this possessor ghost that jumps from object to object really quickly, and it can make objects walk, it can make them fly, and it leads to some fun, creative sequences. And again, that's just a cool idea that's been executed well. The whole concept of the death chill as this big main threat of the movie is a great one, I think. And maybe it manifests in a villain, you know, the main villain for it is not the most interesting, but the ice as a motif, you know, it has potential for visuals, for story, for action. There's a bit where, they've fired their proton packs at the ice character, the Iceman, and the streams coming from the proton packs freeze, and they crash to the ground, and it's like this orange ice that just becomes regular ice and just goes. Again, just an awesome visual, really. Just, I think, having a unique baddie with a unique impact on the world and on the characters is great, and it's what a Ghostbusters movie should be doing, rather than just bringing back Gozer and doing the same plot, It feels like we're understanding the appeal of the possessed painting from Ghostbusters 2. This is a series that should be having weird, memorable things that pop up for one installment and then disappear. With all of this stuff, it's imagery that wouldn't feel out of place in the first movie, but wasn't in the first movie. It's not just similar to stuff we've seen before. It feels in line within the same spirit, no pun intended, of what we've seen before, but it is also doing something different. Unlike Ghostbusters Afterlife, and to be honest, Ghostbusters 2 and Ghostbusters 2016, which might be called Answer the Call, but I'm not sure, it feels committed to actually doing something other than retreading the beats of the original. When we do get callbacks, they're brief. They may be a little indulgent, but they're playful and fun. Comedic moments that reference previous comedic moments, rather than beams of light shining down on, props that were once from a funny scene, but are now just intended to remind you how beautiful and emotional your memories of the original film are. Comedically, it's not on the same level as the original Ghostbusters, which I know might be an unfair standard, but I think it's doing so much that reminds me of that film that it's very easy to fall into comparison there. There was a bit of comedy early on that made me sigh. Paul Rudd is in the office with the mayor, and he goes, "May I approach the bench?" And the mayor goes, "Do you see a bit of rope? I'm not a judge, I'm a mayor." And it's just so ungraceful, graceless and clumsy, and it's just, playing off a similar beat from the first movie that had so much more comedic value, where Winston, just very effectively achieved the same thing just by calling the mayor Your Honor. They don't draw attention to it. It's just a funny thing that, Winston in this moment seems to think the mayor is a judge, and that's all you need. But I think so doing something so similar but so much worse is not very helpful to the film. Beyond that, nothing really stood out to me as being particularly unfunny, which I guess is a plus. It definitely puts it above Ghostbusters 2016, but also there weren't many jokes in the film that have stuck with me for being particularly good. So it's not going to rival the original as a comedy, but in fairness, I don't think it's trying to. It's doing that Afterlife thing of being more of an exciting family adventure than a straight comedy, more fun than funny. And this time, the tone isn't hampered by the self-seriousness that comes from thinking you're continuing the greatest story ever told, so it actually is fun to watch. It's elevated by the fact the cast are all really good and really fun. There are far too many of them, but we'll get to that. As I said, the family ghostbusting stuff was really sweet. I was really moved by the Paul Rudd becoming a father to Phoebe stuff. I think that was really lovely. Phoebe, who I guess is the main character, has this really interesting relationship developed between her and a ghost girl. It's really cool digging into what life is like for those more human ghosts, and seeing a friendship, or more than a friendship, blossom between these two, a Ghostbuster and her sworn enemy. That's really interesting. That's really compelling. Say what you want about this film, it's doing something, it's doing a few things. It's doing lots of things. It's maybe doing too many things. We'll get to that. The stuff with Phoebe and the Ghost I thought was lovely and, just really strong. Helping the new Ghostbusters in supporting roles are the legacy Ghostbusters. Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts are really nice to see. They're in minor but relevant roles. They're there when it feels like they should be. And when they are on screen, it doesn't feel like they're making a huge deal out of it. It's just like, sometimes a conversation will be happening and it'll cut to, oh, Winston's here. It's not a case of, oh my God, that's Winston. He's a Ghostbuster. It's just, yeah, there's that guy. We know him now, I think that all felt right. It felt like, I was happy to see them and I wasn't going, oh God, are we doing this? That reaction was exclusive to Bill Murray. He's hardly in it. I don't miss him when he's gone, and I don't love him when he's there. I think Venkman is just a character that is not fun or endearing or in any way enjoyable to watch when he's 70 years old. I think it's just kind of sad. So yeah, I mean, he's hardly here. It's not a huge loss. Whatever. But my favourite of the legacy characters this time was Ray, which came as a big surprise to me because he's never been my favourite Ghostbuster, and Dan Aykroyd is obviously nuts, so I just didn't expect to feel so endeared by him. I think in the last movie he'd kind of become unrecognisably cynical. In the first film he's giddy, he's excited, he's the silly one, he's the earnest one. So I think making him kind of quippy and, whatever, that wasn't very fun, and that wasn't very, in any way the Ray that we knew. So I think now they've really returned him to that excitable, giddy, he's interested, he's a nerd. I think it's a really sweet idea to pair him with the younger members of the cast to bring out that energy in him, that weird, fun uncle kind of vibe. I think his interactions with Podcast is the kid from the last movie who had a podcast, but he's helping Ray with like a YouTube channel, and he's making sure Ray tells everyone to like and subscribe. And I think that on its own just kind of justifies Podcast being here. Whereas Celeste O'Connor's character has a bit less of a justification. It feels kind of like she's just here because she was in the last one. But even in the last one, she didn't have much to do. Her and Finn Wolfhard, I always felt, had drawn the short straw there. And this isn't much of an improvement. They kind of give Finn Wolfhard, he's got a bit of slapstick with Slimer, but yeah, neither of them feel like they're adding much to this. If you've seen the posters for this movie, or even just heard me describe it, it's not hard to figure out why. This movie is way too crowded. There are 4 kid Ghostbusters, 2 parent Ghostbusters, 4 legacy Ghostbusters, a girl ghost, a Slimer ghost, James Acaster is here as science exposition, Patton Oswalt as mystical exposition, Kumail Nanjiani is here for reasons I don't want to spoil, and Walter Peck is back as the mayor. For the most part, they're all spread out and doing their own thing, and maybe that comes at the expense of 1 or 2 of the threads, but I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying what they're all getting up to. But as we draw closer to the climax, it very suddenly becomes 14 people standing in a room together. It's a similar problem to Jurassic World 3, where they're just moving through, collecting people, adding them to the ensemble until it's very silly. The difference is, although it's crowded and although there's too much going on, this time I like the people and I like what's going on. I can't believe that I do, but I do. Even the exposition guys are fun. James Acaster is pretty good in this, I was expecting him to really play up, the James Acaster shtick that, it makes people laugh, but it's not the funny stuff that he does. It's the, I'm James Acaster, I'm going to be doing my voice, and I thought he would be like that. I thought he'd be dialed up to 11 and oh, Ghostbusters, hey, well, why don't you come with me? And it just not be in any way endearing, and it's maybe the Americans going funny British guy, but he's good. It's a reserved performance. It's a good, interesting addition to the ensemble. And Kumail Nanjiani, that's a fun character for reasons I don't want to go into because it was surprising, and I was having more fun there than I expected to. So yeah, it's fun. All of it is just pretty fun. Have I lost my mind? Maybe I have. I watched this one. I watched 4 Ghostbusters movies in 24 hours, so it's possible that my mind was just melted into ghost-busting, consuming sludge. But I actually would have thought that by the end of all that ghost-busting, I would have been more anti-Ghostbusters than pro. I think this film actually had a harder job because I just watched Afterlife than it would have if I had gone in having not seen that film in 3 years. But I think I just appreciated that in a lot of cases it felt like they had ideas and they did them. They weren't carrying around this ball and chain of legacy. They weren't doing any digital necromancy. They were just doing, what would be fun? Oh yeah, let's do that. Great. I'm sure my incredibly low expectations played a role, but I really did have a good time with this. I don't think it's great, at least I'm not sure it's great yet. This is all a new experience for me. I'm not sure I can necessarily say rush out and see it, but at the same time, I'm surprised, in initial reaction at least, that people aren't responding to this and they're saying, oh, this is the worst one, another crap cash grab sequel, because this is better than everything we've had since the first film. It's not high praise to say this is the best Ghostbusters sequel, but it's praise worth giving. I was someone who was ready to write off the whole concept of Ghostbusters as a franchise. I wanted to be done with it. But now I've kind of become someone who wouldn't mind seeing another one of these, maybe a less crowded one. If they keep coming up with unique, cool villain concepts and MacGuffins, and if they keep focusing on making it a good time, then I'm all for it. Give the next one a better name, though. Frozen Empire is just nonsense. I thought it might make more sense with context, but actually I'm more baffled now, I think. Is it a reference to Donkey Kong Frozen Ape? Maybe. Who knows? So there you have it. Not the video I expected to make this week, but one I'm pretty happy to have made. We'll have to see in the next few weeks whether this wins over the general audience or whether I'm just going to be standing alone as the only fan of this film in the world. I'm very excited to see that. In the meantime, let me know how you feel. Are you with me, or are you watching, jaw drop to the floor at how wrong I am for the very first time in my life? I'd love to hear from you. If anyone has had the same experience as me, hated Afterlife, loved this, not loved, that's very strong. Hated Afterlife, bafflingly enjoyed this. Enjoyed this to a confused degree. Do let me know. Let me know however you felt on this. But maybe I've inspired you to go and see it, and it's just the worst film ever made, and I've completely lost my mind. Thank you very much for watching. As Ray and Podcast would say, remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'm really sorry that I promised a Doctor Who video this week. In my head, on the schedule that I'd made, Ghostbusters was coming out on the 29th of March, so I was going to do this video then. But yeah, I promise next week, Doctor Who. I pinky promise this time. I'll see you then. Love you lots.